Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the History Cloak channel. I'm Mr. McGee. On today's episode and subsequent episodes, we are going to be taking a look at the Bill of Rights. Now, the Bill of Rights holds some of the key amendments in the United States that we cherish the most. These amendments were also so important that certain states were not even willing to sign on to the Constitution unless they were promised that the first Congress of the United States would pass these amendments and send them to the states to be added to the Constitution. Now, when you have amendments that are cherished today and also were so important to the states back at the founding of the country, those are amendments that we should probably take a closer look at. So on today's episode, we are going to take a look at the First Amendment. So ladies and gentlemen, let's begin. Now, it is important for us to remember that the United States' first document that was the foundation for how the country worked and the government worked was the Articles of Confederation. Now, the Articles of Confederation were a disaster, as has been stated in previous videos. The Articles created basically 13 independent countries that kind of loosely associated together and a very weak, useless central government. Now, that was a disaster. So, the founders of our country came together and formed a new convention to change the Articles, but basically once they got together, they said, hey, you know what? Articles, boop, we're tossing that out, and instead we are going to create a brand new document, which would become the Constitution of the United States. So from May through September of 1787, the founders met in Philadelphia and hashed out the Constitution. We're not going to get into all the details of the Constitution. You can go to previous videos to take a look at that. But what I want us to take a look at is what leads up to the Bill of Rights. Now, once the convention was over, there was much debate about passing the Constitution. From the end of 1787 through to the early part of 1788, the states voted on, and most of them passed, or I should say enough of them passed, the Constitution for it to be ratified and to become the document of the United States of America. Now, getting the states to actually pass the Constitution, that was not as easy as a lot of people think. Now, there were two major issues that had to be dealt with in order to get states to pass the Constitution. Number one, many of the states wanted to know, why should we give power to a central government? Won't that basically just create a dictatorship? Isn't it actually better to have 13 independent states that kind of loosely work together? Well, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay wrote a series of 85 essays explaining why this Constitution and why the new government that was being created, why that would actually be a benefit to the United States of America. Why would that be a benefit to the states? So, they had to deal with that issue. The other issue was the fear that the states had that with a strong central government, the rights and freedoms that they cherished, those would be trodden on by the first leader that would come to power and basically decide, hey, you know what, I want all power for myself. So the states wanted a guarantee that the freedoms that they loved, the freedoms that they cherished, would be protected from any leader that would come to power. Hence, the Bill of Rights. Now, funny enough, there were certain founding fathers like James Madison and Alexander Hamilton who did not see a need for a Bill of Rights. Their argument was, hey, first of all, a Bill of Rights, that's normally an agreement between a king and his subjects if we look at history. Never has it been done between the people who are basically the rulers in a democracy and the government. Their argument was also that you don't need a freedom of the press when the Constitution does not give the government any power over the press. Since the government has no power, therefore, why does the press, for instance, need protection? That argument did not dissuade the states from demanding that there be a Bill of Rights. Now, guys like James Madison came around in the end to the idea of a Bill of Rights and could appreciate why the states and the citizens of those states really wanted those protections guaranteed in the Constitution. And so, James Madison became a supporter of it in the end. Now, fast forwarding just a little bit, the Congress of the United States starts for the very first time on March 4th, 1789. September 25th of that same year, Congress passes 12 amendments that are then sent to the states to be voted on. Now, don't forget, you need 3/4 of the states to pass an amendment before it becomes part of the Constitution. Now, the states passed 10 of the 12 amendments, and those 10 amendments became the Bill of Rights. Now, I know some of you out there are wondering, hey, wait a second. If Congress passed 12 and the states passed 10 and put them into the Constitution, then what were the other two that didn't make it? Well, the two that didn't make it, those were procedural rules. So, for instance, one amendment dealt with what is the ratio of representatives to number of people in a state. So that's more of a procedural rules issue. The second one that didn't pass dealt with when a pay raise for congressmen should start. Now, that would eventually become an amendment to the Constitution 200 years later, but it was not an amendment added to the Constitution in 1789. The states were focused on protecting certain freedoms for individuals, for the citizens of the United States. So procedural issues and pay raise rules were not what the states wanted to focus on. So the 10 amendments are passed, and voila, we have the Bill of Rights. Now, with those 10 amendments firmly ensconced in the Constitution, let's take a look at Amendment 1. Amendment 1 states, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, of the right of the people to peaceably assemble, to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Now, one thing you'll notice is that Amendment 1 has not one freedom, but 4 different freedoms. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, and freedom to protest peacefully. We're going to break down each of those freedoms and explain why they're important to a free society and how they impact us today. Freedom of religion. Now, you'll notice with the freedom of religion part of the First Amendment, that freedom of religion is broken into 2 sections. You have the free exercise clause and you have the establishment clause. Now, both of these are important. Now, before I go a step further in explaining these 2 sections, it is important to note, if you want to understand a lot of the decisions made by the Founding Fathers, you need to take a look at European history, especially European history post the fall of the Roman Empire. Many of the mistakes that were made on the continent of Europe and many of the successes that were made on the continent of Europe inform a lot of the decisions that the Founding Fathers make in terms of the Constitution, in terms of the creation of government, and also in terms of the freedoms that are protected under the Constitution. By the way, second note, that does not mean that European history before the fall of the Roman Empire should be skipped. If you study Roman history, and if you also study the Greek Empire before Rome, it will inform a lot of the decisions that we have involving things like democracy, representative government. How does that work? What are the dangers in giving power to one person? History before the fall of Rome is important. I just happen to be emphasizing the post-fall Europe, but they're both important. Now, when the Reformation hits in Europe, you have 2 main branches of Christianity. You have the Roman Catholic branch and you have the Protestant branch. Now, why is this important to know? Well, if you were in a particular European country and the king or queen happened to be a Catholic king or queen, then if you were a Catholic citizen, you were protected. But if you were a Protestant, then you were persecuted, you lost rights under the law, and you could be put to death. Conversely, if you were in a European country where the king or queen was a Protestant, then if you're a Protestant citizen, hey, you're good. Life is good. But if you're a Catholic citizen, then your rights under the law were taken away, you were persecuted, and you could be put to death. Many wars in Europe were fought along that Roman Catholic Protestant divide. Now, if you are a founder of the United States, you are looking at Europe and you're hoping to avoid that. You do not want the country breaking down in religious sectarianism. So, the First Amendment becomes important, and those 2 sections of the religion clause become important. The U.S. government cannot create a state religion, a state church that all people have to fund, and that becomes the identity of the government. So, the United States government will not be a Roman Catholic government. The United States government will not be a Protestant government. Instead, it is just the government. It protects people's right to worship God in the way that they choose. As a final note, even though I'm talking about Christianity because that would have been the focus of the Founding Fathers, obviously freedom of religion means if you're following Judaism or Hinduism or Buddhism or Islam, you have the freedom to be able to practice and follow your own faith. Number 2, freedom of speech. If you're going to have a free society, people have to have the ability to speak out against or for a particular law, or against or for a particular leader, or anything going on in the government. If they can't, they're not truly free, and society is not truly free, and you end up creating the foundation necessary for a dictator to come to power if the government can curb freedom of speech. By the way, the fact that people can speak freely without fear of government reprisal, in other words, government attack on them because of what they say, that actually allows free and fair debate to actually flow in the country. You actually have a better chance of coming to the truth of a particular situation or of exposing the faults of something because there's now free and open dialogue without fear of reprisal. Also, it holds the government to account. Because people can speak freely against the government or for the government can't hide from the people. It forces the government to have to actually listen to its citizens, and it also allows citizens to make changes that they believe is necessary for the government to function. Also, because I'm allowed to believe, meaning to think freely, and I'm also able to speak freely, there's a knock-on effect among the citizens. Because we have those freedoms, we have to be able to come together. When I say come together, I don't mean, and we all agree together, but we have to come together and be able to listen to opposing points of view. Freedom of speech and freedom of religion actually exposes us to opposing viewpoints and helps us, even if we still disagree with the person, to understand where they're coming from because they are able to speak and also to be able to believe freely. And also, it helps us to be able to see that person, even in disagreement, as a fellow human being, even if we don't agree with what the person's saying. And conversely, by listening to someone we disagree with, we might realize, hey, they're actually right. And then we change our minds and adopt their views. Number 3, freedom of the press. Now, freedom of the press is important because in theory, the press is supposed to have an adversarial role towards the government. In other words, the press is supposed to ferret out information and give it to the public, allowing the public to be able to make its own decision. In order for that to happen, you have to have a free press. If the government controls the press, then the press is only giving out information that the government or the leader of the government wants the people to hear. That means the people cannot make an informed decision as to whether they agree or disagree with what their leadership is doing. Having a free press holds the government to account because they know, hey, if I do something wrong, that information will get out to the people, and then the people could vote me out of office. Now, if you want to see why freedom of the press is important, take a look at countries that don't have a free press. So if we go back in history, we could take a look at Pravda, which was the Soviet news outlet. Ironically, Pravda means truth, yet anything that Pravda produced, you knew was not truth because it was just the Soviet Union controlling it. If you want to take a look at a present-day example, take a look at North Korea. North Korea's press is not free. It's controlled by Kim Jong-un, so the people only hear what the totalitarian communist government of North Korea wants them to hear. Not only does that leave the people of North Korea ignorant as to the truth of their own government, it actually, in North Korea's case, leaves the people ignorant to what's going on outside of their country. Do you see, by the way, how speech and freedom of the press are interlinked? If I don't have accurate information, how can I then make an informed decision whether to oppose or support an action of the government or an action of the leader of the country? Number 4, the right to protest peacefully. Now, the key word in this part of the amendment is peacefully. You have the right to protest peacefully. You don't have the right to protest violently. Now, you'll hear people say, hey, you just have the right to protest. Well, no, you have the right to protest peacefully. If it's not peaceful, then you aren't actually participating in democracy. So think about it like this. If I protest peacefully, I am demonstrating against my government. I want the officials in my government to know that I and, let's say, the tens of thousands of people that I can get to go with me, that we disagree with an action of the government. Each person in that protest represents a vote. Not only that, but if my protest is big enough, then I might be able to influence other people to agree with me, which means that's more votes against what the government is doing. Therefore, the government might change their position. Notice what I'm doing. Because it's peaceful, I am having to persuade both the members of the government and also my fellow citizens that my way is correct. I'm engaging, in essence, in debate and persuasion. Now, if I protest violently, I'm not actually participating in democracy. What I'm doing is actually holding my fellow citizens and the government hostage, saying, if you don't do what I want, then I will commit violence. I will harm people. I will harm their businesses. I will harm the city or the town wherever I'm protesting. That's not democracy. That's a form of terrorism. It's a form of mob violence. It's saying, give me what I want. I don't care if anybody disagrees with me. I don't care if I'm in the minority. You will give me what I want, or else I will destroy things, or I will destroy you. That's not democracy. That's not the free exchange of ideas. So therefore, protesting peacefully, that word peacefully is so important because it allows us to flow in a democracy together. So I hope you're able to see how all four of those are interlinked and why those make up the First Amendment. I need the power to believe and think, the power to speak out, the power to get accurate information, and have the power to act on that and get the government to change what it's doing based on me protesting peacefully. Now, one last personal note. In the wake of the assassination of Charlie Kirk, I think that's caused a lot of us to pause and take a look at the freedoms that we have, and especially the freedoms under the First Amendment, and to understand the importance that for our society and our country to work, we have to be able to appreciate those freedoms, not just for ourselves, but for the people that we disagree with. It means that not only do I need to exercise freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, and the right to protest peacefully, and I need to protect those, I also need to allow it for others. I need to be able to say, hey, you know what? I may disagree with you, but guess what? You are a fellow human being. You are a citizen of this country. You have intrinsic worth and value. You were made to be an image bearer of God. And so therefore, while I may disagree with you, you have the same freedoms and I will hear you out. When we have dialogue, even in disagreement, we also get a chance to see the other person as a human being. When we deny that one particular side has the right to exercise their First Amendment freedoms, when we cloak it under words like fascism or hate speech or white supremacy, when we're not talking about the KKK, all right? When we do that, we end up creating not a fellow human being who has intrinsic value, who is made to be an image bearer of God. Instead, what we do is we end up creating an enemy, a caricature that is meant to be destroyed. And when you no longer see someone as a human being, then you're capable of doing anything to them. That has been one of the lessons of history. When you no longer look at someone and see that they are a fellow human being, you're capable of the worst evil. So I hope that we will learn from Charlie Kirk's example of, even though I may disagree with you, I want to have dialogue and conversation, and to see you as the fellow human being with intrinsic worth and value, made to be an image bearer of God. And so therefore, even in disagreement, I will still talk and dialogue with you. I hope that we take that lesson from Charlie Kirk's death. Well, as you know, I don't do a lot of personal notes on this channel, and I hope that I won't have to do any personal notes like this for a long, long time to come. So, per the usual, if you have any questions or comments, please leave them respectfully and politely in the comment section below. I'm Mr. McGee. Take care.